Night. I know you guys have been working hard all week. You're tired, but I didn't travel 4,500 miles for a flat room, right? So I want you guys to be energetic. I want to hear some feedback. I want to make sure you guys are alive and listening. Listen, it's a real great pleasure. Can I thank the wonderful Mecca Centre? My first time here, I had the pleasure of being able to use your masala and pray. I got to see your centre. It's a wonderful centre, a great facility, and a wonderful ecosystem of Muslim organisations that you had, as you heard from the council already, and the fantastic work that they're doing. So all the partners, including Impact of course, have my gratitude for hosting me and hosting the team here this evening. I have been in the US for a couple of days, as Harris was saying. It's been a whirlwind couple of days. And even just coming into this wonderful Makkah Centre, I have met a number of you who have already told me your roots with Scotland. Some of you have told me you visited Scotland. There was one of our elders who told me he came to Scotland in some in the 90s, in the 2000s, and many of you have visited Scotland. Many of you have relatives in Scotland. Many of you have seen our beautiful cities, our gorgeous glens. One or two of you may even be married to a Scot, and some of you tell me that you even spotted the Loch Ness Monster. Alhamdulillah. So all of your wonderful links to Scotland, it reminds me of a very famous saying and a truthful saying, that there are two types of people in the world: Scots and those who want to be Scottish. Whichever category you're in. There is a third category, those that don't have any ambition whatsoever, but here, we'll leave them to a second. Thank you, that was one person laughed at that. That was worth more than that. It's a real pleasure to be in this city. I've been in Chicago before. I actually came for the ISNA conference in 2006, I want to say, in Chicago. Was it the Rosemont Conference Center or something? Is that right? Yeah, many moons ago. But it's a real pleasure to be back in this wonderful city. A city that has given the world, of course, so much. You've given us jazz, you've given us skyscrapers. I would suggest you've given us the greatest basketball team in history. That was a really cheap applause, right? I say that in every city I go. No, I'm just kidding. The Chicago Bulls, that Michael Jordan team, right? That was the best in history. I also, this afternoon, I had the really delightful and delicious pleasure of tasting your famous deep pan pizza. A pizza so deep that even a Scotsman from the country that invented the deep fried Mars bar looked at your deep pan pizza and said, "That's a bit excessive." I will be honest with you, it's a bit excessive. It is an honour to be here. Look, there's a few cities in the world where the story of immigration, the story of struggle, reinvention, resilience, I think there's few that struggle is more visible than here in Chicago. The story of contemporary Chicago, in my view, is intertwined with the tale of American Muslims. It was here in not the 1960s or 50s like the UK, but the 1920s, that some of the earliest Muslim communities built mosques and civic institutions. Of course, this is the city that Malcolm X lived, organised, and transformed lives. And today, we have around nearly half a million Muslims living in Greater Chicago. And that wonderful diversity that was referenced is so evident. Black Muslims, African American Muslims, Arab, South Asian, Bosnian, Latino, our reverts, white reverts, as well. Muslims in all our beautiful diversity that make up that wonderful rich tapestry of the city. A Muslim community that is so diverse, I would suggest probably more diverse, frankly, than some countries. So when I speak about the future of Muslims in the West, I talk about representation, I talk about resilience, I talk about the fight against Islamophobia, then Chicago is not just a backdrop, I think it is the case study. Chicago has long been a place where progressive movements succeeded, where they are powered by courage, where they're powered by conviction, where they're powered by coalition. From the incredible Harold Washington right the way through to contemporary days Brandon Johnson, who I want to congratulate for that casting vote that saw, of course, that Gaza ceasefire. I think he should be congratulated for showing the same courage on that vote. From trade union organisers to civil rights activists, this city has never lacked people who are willing to fight for justice, where the odds were stacked against them. And as a Scot, that makes me feel at home. We are the ultimate nation of the underdog. I strangely feel very at home here, because everywhere I go in the world, I find two things. The bagpipes, and I also find Scots who claim that they built the place. But in Chicago, we actually did. One of the oldest Scottish organisations in the United States, the St. Andrews Society, was founded here in 1845. I mean, not in Mucka Centre, in Chicago, more in 1845. There's been a statue of Robert Burns, who's Scotland's most famous poet, in Garfield Park. It's been in there since 1906. One of the first statues of Robert Burns ever outside of Scotland. And the University of Chicago, their early academics, they drew heavily on the Scottish Enlightenment. The works of people like David Hume and Adam Smith that talked about belief in reason, progress, justice, not as an add-on or as an indulgence, but as an absolute obligation for a fair society. So the bonds between our two nations, they go deeper actually than just this city and this state. In fact, out of the 47 men who've served as President of the United States, 35 of them claim to be Scottish or have Ulster Scots descent, including, of course, the current holder of the office, President Trump, whose mother was born on the Isle of Lewis. I didn't say we were perfect as a nation. We're close. It's an interesting phenomenon here in the United States. We actually see politicians falling over themselves in order to talk up their ancestral links, be that to Scotland, as I've mentioned, or, for example, with the former president, like Irish ancestry. Even President Obama would joke that there was a missing apostrophe in his surname. And I would suggest to you that if those politicians can proudly talk up their ancestry, if they can proudly talk up their identity, if they can proudly talk about their faith, then the same rules should apply to Muslims, without being accused of being disloyal to your country, the only country that we call home. And that's one of the reasons, amongst many, why I am absolutely delighted to be joining you days after the stunning victory of Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani. As I've been saying to many Muslim communities here since I arrived, Zohran Mamdani Mubarak to you all. From the other side of the pond, the other side of the Atlantic, I've been watching his campaign, his energetic campaign, relentlessly positive campaign. I really am inspired, because he's somebody that wears his identity as a Muslim with real pride, unapologetically. And I think he spoke for so many of us when he articulated with great emotion, powerfully, how 24 years on from those dreadful terror attacks on 9/11, that Muslims continue to be targeted, abused, and vilified under the glare of suspicion, all for a crime that we did not commit. And therein, I think, lies the very first lesson. We must be unapologetically Muslim. Be proud of your identity as Muslim. Never be ashamed or say sorry for who you are. For if you're ashamed, for if you try to hide who you are, then don't expect anybody else to respect you. And don't expect anybody to stand up for you. And I have to say, as well as being inspired by Zohran's campaign, on the other side, I've been utterly horrified at how hysterical, deeply personal, and violent the Islamophobic abuse that he has been on the receiving end of. And they've attacked him for how he eats, and saying what an alien culture he must be, because what kind of man from our country eats food with his hands? This, of course, being the country where people stuff their face with pizza, burgers, and hot dogs, with not a knife and fork in sight. And as the election drew closer, the Islamophobia became even more unhinged. And what makes the attacks even more abhorrent is that they didn't come from keyboard warriors, or didn't only come from keyboard warriors who had the comfort of anonymity. Far from it. They came from some of the most senior, prominent politicians, most senior media commentators, and most senior billionaires and entrepreneurs, like Bill Ackman, for example, that this country has produced. A jihadi communist, said Senator Ted Cruz. Let's forget the fact that it's impossible to be a jihadi communist, and communists were racist fortune. But anyway, again, we understand the point. And then there was Mamdani's scandal-ridden opponent, Andrew Cuomo, who enlarged and darkened Mamdani's beard in his campaign literature, and who laughed when a radio host, in agreement, when a radio host said Mamdani would cheer another 9/11. So, when it comes to Islamophobia, we live in a world where Muslims are fair game. But despite that barrage of hatred and negativity, I was really proud to see Mamdani prevail in New York. My only complaint about Zohran, frankly speaking, is that his Urdu is far better than mine. Asian mums across the world were sending their children that Bollywood-esque campaign video he made on WhatsApp and saying, oh, why can't you speak as nice Urdu as Zohran Beta? So, that's my only complaint. But look, virtually every Muslim, this is the point our brother Abdullah Mitchell was making a moment ago. The problems we're facing are transatlantic. The same problems you're facing here are the same problems we're facing in the United Kingdom. And every Muslim that has stood for public office in the United Kingdom and in the United States has faced the same lazy anti-Muslim tropes. Jihadist, terrorist, Islamist, or go back home, as President Trump said to Ilhan Omar. And let me say this, in my 40 years of being on this planet, the only people that have told me to go home are racists. And I'm afraid it is the man at the very top, the commander-in-chief, that is setting the tone. Just look at how vile his comments have been against people like Ilhan Omar, like Zohran, like Sadiq Khan. And, I can't quite put my finger on what it is that annoys the president about progressive Muslim, black and brown politicians who are immigrants. But I think it might be one of those things. Whether here in the United States or across the Atlantic in the UK, each and every single one of us has been accused of being a terrorist sympathizer, disloyal to our own countries. And I term this the kind of racism and bigotry we see. We now see a phenomena that I call Schrodinger's racist. Because what Schrodinger's racist does is, on the one hand, he demands that Muslims integrate. Why don't you take part in society? Why don't you integrate as Muslims? So then we do, and we take part in elections, which are the ultimate expression of integration in a democratic election, and then we win those elections because we're so wonderfully charismatic and popular. And then those very same bigots cry, how dare you infiltrate our society? So we cannot win, because the system that they've created is rigged against us. So we now have Muslim mayors in London and in New York, the biggest cities in the UK and the US respectively. Now if that isn't integration, then I don't know what is. But you see, Sadiq Khan and Zohran Mamdani were not elected because they were Muslim. They were elected because they chose to campaign on hope, talking of the power of the collective, not the individual, by running on a bold and progressive agenda, radical agenda, and being unapologetic for it. And instead of pandering to the far right, like so many politicians do, and perhaps it's a lesson for progressives in that on both sides of the Atlantic, that hope can triumph over fear. And we should be more assertive in how we tackle the narrative from the Islamophobic bigots who talk about immigration being a terrible detriment to our society. Well, the centre is an example of how migration has been wonderfully successful in this city and in this state. And in fact, every single study, virtually every single study under the sun, shows that migrants have contributed more to the United States and the United Kingdom than they have taken. But look, we as Muslims, we can't afford to be passive. And therein lies perhaps the second lesson, that we need to, frankly, quit complaining. My message, yes, is one of hope, but also I hope a rallying cry for action. I didn't come here just to deliver a speech. I didn't go and take 6 days away from my kids. And my wife, well, my kids, don't let me sleep, so it's not been a bad thing that I've had 6 days of uninterrupted sleep. I didn't leave them because I just wanted to make a bunch of speeches. I came here because I need you to act. I've got to act, but I need you to act. I'm tired of moaning. I'm done with complaining. I've had enough of the self-pity. So if you're worried about the state of the world, then get up and be counted. Do something about it. Surely the lesson from Mamdani and others is that we have to mobilize. We have to organize. We have to use the God-given talent that you've been blessed with to change our condition. We've got to write our own stories, not let other people narrate it for us. And that's why the work of Impact is so important. They're not just theorising about change. They're not just writing or churning out academic papers. They're on the ground doing the hard work. I saw it firsthand yesterday when I was with them in Capitol Hill. They're doing the hard yards with representatives on the Foreign Relations Committee, for example. And that's why you've, inshallah, got to get involved in the wonderful work that they're doing. Friends, I've been blessed during my political career to travel around the world, and during that time I've met Muslim communities across the world. From the east to the west, from north to the south. We're 2 billion strong. And it's interesting because we have politicians who are in elected office, as I've mentioned, Zohran and Sadiq Khan, and yet we feel very weak. You see, the battle for justice is not only fought at the ballot box, it's also fought where the world's conscience is breaking. And no more can that be true than in Gaza. When I think about President Trump and travelling to the Gulf with his first foreign visit during his second term, and there he was promised over $1 trillion of investment and given a new plane. And yet just across the border, we couldn't even get a loaf of bread into Gaza. For shame. Shame on every single world leader in the East and the West that was so pathetically weak that we couldn't stop the mass slaughter of children and the mass starvation of 2 million people. And I genuinely pray, and maybe it's the wrong prayer to make, I don't know, but I genuinely pray that God lets me live long enough so that I get to see that those who were complicit, tried in the international court, found guilty, thrown in jail, and frankly, I hope they rot there for the rest of their lives. Because over 2 years, and we've witnessed the world's first ever live stream genocide. Over 20,000 children killed, 70,000 people killed, and that's an absolute underestimate. And the UN estimating that 70% of those that have been murdered are women and children. Every single hospital in Gaza bombed, every school bombed, refugee camps, UN facilities, water infrastructure, all bombed. More media personnel, including of course journalists, have been killed in Gaza than all other conflicts since World War II combined. And all of this happening in plain sight. So if Gaza is the cemetery upon which our collective humanity has died, then what we're witnessing in Sudan is the ground upon which it's now being buried. And yet, on the other hand, I see our Muslim communities, and I see so much talent, so much wealth, so much innovation, so much ingenuity, so much creativity, so much drive. So quit being down. I know times are tough. I know the situation I've described sounds difficult. But it's not within our DNA to be pessimistic, fatalistic, or downtrodden. Our mission, and it is a mission, is not just to better the world for ourselves, no, but for the whole of humanity. And how can there be a more noble mission than this? So whatever you choose to do, from making money, to writing books, to research, to public service, let's do it with the intention of serving humanity. But also let's get organised. At a time when our challenges are cross-Atlantic, we have to pool our resources and our efforts. And that's why I've been calling throughout this tour for a transatlantic alliance made up of Muslims and our allies to tackle that rising tide of hatred that is poisoning our societies, our politics, and our discourse. We need good people, rooted in ethical values, inspired by the common good, rising through the ranks of public service, media, business, and entrepreneurship. And we must never forget our common humanity, because that is at the core of what we need to do. You see, it's an issue, I know you pride yourself here in the Mecca Centre. I was being told by some of those involved the great interfaith work that you do with the Christian communities in particular. And I know you'll do some outreach for the Jewish communities, I'm certain, as well. Reminding us that we have far more in common than we do that divides us. And I'm often reminded at that point of the story, I don't need to go into the detail of it, but the story of Najashi, the Negus. Of course, it was the kindness of a Christian king who wept so much that his beard was wet when he heard the opening verses of Surah Maryam from the Prophet ﷺ's cousin, Ja'far bin Abi Talib. It was the kindness of that Christian king that allowed Islam to grow to 2 billion strong as it is today. And it's perhaps that lesson of empathy and kindness of the Negus, a Christian king, speaking and acting with truth in the face of power, that we must never forget, for it's our empathy that makes us human. So if a Christian king in Abyssinia could protect Muslim refugees 14 centuries ago, then surely in the 21st century, Muslims, Christians, Jews and others, people of all faiths and none, can protect each other, not only in spirit, but in action. Let me end by returning to that famous Scot whose statue is in Garfield Park, Robert Burns. Every year as the clock strikes 12 on the 31st of December, to bring in the new year, people from across the world, they hold hands and they sing Auld Lang Syne, which is one of Robert Burns' famous poems. However, it's one of his other works that is my favourite. My favourite poem of Robert Burns, or Rabbie Burns, as we call him back home, is titled Is There for Honest Poverty. It's an ode of universal brotherhood, where he writes that man to man, the world over, shall brothers be for all that. So from this day forward, let us refuse to be spectators in the story of our own fate. Let's be the authors. The ones who didn't fold in the face of the most abhorrent and violent anti-Muslim hatred, but rose above it. The ones who believed that a Scottish Muslim, a New York socialist, a Christian king in Abyssinia, and a poet from Ayrshire in Scotland all belong in the same narrative, that narrative of our common humanity. And let's work and endeavour to work across the Atlantic and throughout the world to be the masters of our own destiny, not for our self-interest, but for the betterment of all of humanity. And if we do that, I promise you that we will fulfil our obligation to our children to leave them a much better future in the days to come. And in me, you will find not just an ally, you will find a fellow brother who's willing to work with you in order to make sure that we fulfill that promise to our children and our future generations to come. I look forward to talking to you. Wassalamu warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.